I have always been fascinated by stories of abandoned places, and when I heard about the old paper mill that was up for sale, my interest was instantly piqued. The factory, closed for decades after a mysterious fire, had a reputation for being haunted, which only heightened my desire to explore it. Along with a few adventurous friends, we decided to spend a night at the factory to uncover its secrets. When we arrived, the factory looked like it was straight out of a horror movie. The brick structure was covered in graffiti, and vegetation grew wildly around it. The broken windows and partially collapsed roof gave the place a sinister appearance. The sky was overcast, and the light drizzle added to the oppressive atmosphere. We entered through the main door, which was rusted and creaked ominously. The interior was pitch dark, with only the light from our flashlights guiding the way. The factory was filled with old machinery and dusty equipment, and the musty smell was almost unbearable. As we explored, the environment seemed to transform into a horror film set. Inexplicable sounds, like echoes and whispers, began to manifest. At first, we tried to ignore the noises, thinking they were just the wind and the old structure making sounds. But as the night progressed, the echoes became clearer and more regular, as if they were trying to communicate something. We found a room that appeared to have been left almost intact. On a table in the corner, there were old papers and records that seemed to detail a series of experiments conducted at the factory before the fire. The documents spoke of attempts to create a new type of paper that could record emotions and thoughts. The idea seemed absurd, but the feeling that something was wrong began to grow within us. We decided to split up to search for more information. While I explored the upper floor, I began to hear footsteps coming from the lower floor, even though no one was down there. The feeling of being watched intensified, and the whispers grew louder and clearer. It was as if the factory were alive, trying to communicate something to us. Suddenly, one of my friends screamed from downstairs. I ran to find him and saw him in a state of panic, staring at a fixed point on the wall. There, in the shadows, was a skeletal and grotesque figure that seemed to have emerged straight out of a nightmare. The sight was so shocking that we froze for a moment, unable to react. The figure disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, and the echoes began to intensify, creating a cacophony of voices and sounds overlapping one another. With the situation spiraling out of control, we decided to leave the factory immediately. Running for the exit, the urgency drove us to leave as quickly as possible, and the echoes seemed to follow us to the door. Outside the factory, the relief was immediate, but the experience left us with a sense of unease that lingered for a long time. We discovered that the factory had been the site of a series of tragic events and failed experiments, and the feeling that something was amiss seemed to have a real basis. We never returned to the factory, and the story of the echoes continues to haunt us. The sensation of having witnessed something beyond human comprehension is something we will never forget. When I was hired to inspect the condition of an old, deactivated food factory for a potential sale, I didn't expect to find anything out of the ordinary. The factory, located in a remote suburb, had been closed for years due to a combination of financial and health issues. The previous owner had passed away months earlier, and the place was completely abandoned. The task seemed straightforward: inspect the property and draft a report on its condition. Upon arrival, I was met with an enormous and imposing structure, covered in graffiti and debris. The factory had a grand appearance, with its steel framework and large, dusty windows. The exterior was cluttered with tall weeds and trash, which obscured a full view of the building. I entered the building with my flashlight and clipboard, bracing myself for a lengthy inspection. The interior was in poor shape, with rusted equipment and boxes stacked haphazardly. The old machines and conveyor belts were still in place, but the dust and mold gave the area a sense of decay. As I walked through the corridors, I noticed something peculiar. Silence. The factory was so quiet it felt as though the sound was being absorbed by the walls. This was surprising, given the size of the building. Usually, places like this have a range of occasional noises, but here there was a deep, unsettling quiet. I decided to start my inspection in the storage area. The shelves were empty, but I found some old records and documents scattered on the floor. As I examined the documents, I noticed many were related to a supply contract that appeared to have been abruptly halted. There were also several health inspection reports indicating serious issues with the factory. While going through the papers, I heard a faint, distant noise, like something being dragged. At first, I thought it was an illusion caused by the echo in the space. But as the sound grew clearer and closer, I began to feel uneasy. I looked around but saw no one. The building seemed deserted. The noise grew louder, and I decided to investigate. I walked through the corridors, trying to follow the sound, until I reached a back area of the factory that looked like it had been closed off for a long time. The door was slightly ajar, and upon pushing it, I discovered a hidden room. Inside the room, I found several dated food product bags, apparently intact, but what really concerned me were the boxes containing electronic equipment and unknown devices. There were also additional documents suggesting that the factory was involved in unregistered and possibly illegal activities. The tension mounted when I realized that the door to the room was now shut, and the sound I had heard was more intense, as if something was moving or someone was trying to get in. I had no idea what could be causing this, but the sense of imminent danger was palpable. I decided to leave quickly, but when I tried to open the door, I found it was locked from the inside. The situation was becoming increasingly threatening. With the help of a tool I had, I managed to force the door open and escape the room. Returning to the main corridor, the silence returned, but the feeling that something was very wrong didn't go away. I quickly gathered what I needed and left the factory, making sure to do a final check to ensure I wasn't being followed. When I finally exited the building and got into my car, the relief was mixed with the unsettling realization that something sinister was happening there. Something that seemed far more complex and dangerous than I had initially imagined. The report I wrote included all my findings, but I omitted some details, as what I truly discovered in the factory appeared to be a threat beyond my comprehension. When I was offered the task of inspecting an old, deactivated electronics factory for potential revitalization, I accepted with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The factory, located on the outskirts of a small town, had ceased operations years ago, and the project involved assessing the building's condition and conducting a preliminary safety evaluation. The first thing that struck me upon arrival was the immense size of the factory. The building was a massive structure of steel and glass, now in ruins. The facade was covered in grime, and the windows, either broken or obscured, gave the place a particularly grim appearance. The surrounding land was overgrown with weeds and debris, as if time had forgotten the place. I entered with a flashlight, a camera, and a clipboard to take notes. The interior was in disarray, with equipment scattered around and dust settled on every surface. The smell of rusted metal and moldy wood was overpowering. However, the feeling of being watched had accompanied me from the moment I stepped inside the factory. The factory had once boasted a large training area for new employees. I decided to start my inspection there, as it seemed like a good place to begin. The room was filled with training materials, such as manuals, old videos, and demonstration equipment. As I reviewed the documents, I began to hear strange noises coming from the back of the building. There were sounds of footsteps and creaking doors, as if someone was moving through the facility. The predominant silence of the place made every small noise seem amplified. Following the sounds, I reached an area that appeared to have been a training auditorium. The chairs were stacked, and the stage was covered in a thick layer of dust. What drew my attention were the old projectors and screens still set up. There was also a large box of equipment with old labels. I decided to open the box and found various audio and video equipment, many of which seemed to be in excellent condition despite the dust. I also discovered several old videotapes labeled Advanced Training. I decided to examine one of the tapes on the old projector to see what was being taught. To my surprise, the tapes contained recordings of training sessions that were extremely detailed and technical, but they also showed something more disturbing. The recordings included detailed instructions on how to manipulate and control electronic systems invasively. The information was too technical to fully comprehend, but the tone and nature of the materials were alarming. It was then that I heard a loud noise, like something had fallen or been knocked over, coming from the area where I had started. The sound was so intense that I almost thought someone was in the building. I decided to investigate and, upon reaching the location, found no one there, but I noticed that the environment had changed, as if something had been moved. A growing sense of unease took over me. There was an increasing feeling that I wasn't alone. The sense of being followed was palpable, and I began to think that there might be someone else in the factory. Deciding it was time to leave, I quickly gathered my notes and equipment, trying to remain calm. As I made my way to the exit, the sounds of footsteps and creaking doors grew more intense, as if something was getting closer. When I finally exited the factory and got into my car, the relief was immediate, but the unease lingered. What was really happening in that factory? Was there something more sinister behind the training materials and the sounds I heard? The report I wrote included the findings about the training materials and safety observations, but I left out the sense of being pursued that I experienced. The factory, with all its secrets and mysteries, left an indelible mark on my memory.